Hayward cautioned Logan not to talk to anyone about their new property before it was official. But they knew who they wanted to write their new book musical, and it just had to be Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Just talking musicals with you.
Hello, I'm Lesley Anne Knight and welcome to Season 4 of Just Talking Musicals. Coming up this season, we've got the stories behind how two iconic Broadway shows, South Pacific and Guys and Dolls, made it from inspirational spark to Broadway sensations. And we have a special Season 4 interview for you with Olivier Award-winning choreographer and director Stephen Mear. We'll be talking about how he got started in the business, his role models, theatrical heroes, favourite shows, and his invaluable advice for aspiring young professionals. At the end of Season 3, we left our roll call of 20th century musicals not to be missed with the 1946 Irving Berlin sensation Annie Get Your Gun, based on the extraordinary real-life story of legendary sharpshooter Annie Oakley. The Broadway of the early 20th century introduced the world at large to some extraordinary musical talents, including Jerome Kern, George and Ira Gershwin, Richard Rodgers, Lawrence Hart, Oscar Hammerstein II, Cole Porter and Irving Berlin. And these well-known names were by no means the only talent in town, and the Broadway show, even after the privations of a decade-long financial depression and 2 world wars, still managed to keep its head above water and deliver outstanding musical theatre to eager audiences, which continue to be revived, lauded and applauded right up to this very day. In the years following World War II, America experienced a sharp rise in prosperity unheard of in 20 years, with wartime production helping to lever America's economy out of recession and back to steady growth. Leaving the lean years of the Great Depression and the privations of war behind them, America got back to business in no uncertain terms, with a boom in employment, manufacturing and building, along with a new generation eager to spend. In Great Britain, 21-year-old Princess Elizabeth married Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten on the 20th of November 1947 in a majestic wedding ceremony held in Westminster Abbey in front of 2,000 invited guests. The princess wore a Norman Hartnell dress made with ivory Duchesse satin bought with the still prerequisite ration coupons, and the wedding was broadcast to 200 million radio listeners around the world. In other global news, the world was stunned 2 months later by the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the Indian independence movement, as he walked to a prayer meeting in New Delhi early one evening. But his legacy and influence on figures such as Martin Luther King, Steve Biko and Nelson Mandela was to give impetus and power to the ever-growing civil rights movement around the world. In sport, 30-year-old Dutch athlete and mother of 2, Fanny Blankers-Koen, became the first woman to win a phenomenal 4 gold medals at the 1948 Olympic Games in London. And just a few weeks later, on the other side of the Atlantic, the news was announced that Babe Ruth, the greatest baseball player of all time, had sadly lost his fight with cancer and died at the age of 53. Before his funeral service at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, his casket was taken to the world-famous Yankee Stadium in the South Bronx, often called the house that Ruth built, where it stayed for 2 days, while 77,000 loyal fans filed past to pay their final respects to their sporting hero. And on Broadway, producers were hitting their stride, with outstanding theatre like Tennessee Williams' new play A Streetcar Named Desire, which was playing to packed houses at the Ethel Barrymore on West 47th Street, starring 2 virtual unknowns in the lead roles in the form of British-born Jessica Tandy and a 24-year-old actor by the name of Marlon Brando. Opening a few months later, up just a few blocks at the Alvin Theatre on West 52nd Street, a comedy called Mr. Roberts about life in the Navy during World War II was also packing them in, and it starred one of America's most popular movie stars, Henry Fonda, in the title role. Based on a series of short stories by Thomas Hagen about life in the South Pacific on board ship during World War II, leading theatrical agent and producer Leland Hayward had acquired the rights and invited writer-director Joshua Logan to adapt the book for the stage with Tom Hagen, and along with Streetcar, Mr. Roberts became the other must-see play on Broadway that season. When Hayward and Logan were in the middle of pre-production for Mr. Roberts, they dined with a group of friends at the fashionable theatrical restaurant Sardi's after a spellbinding evening at the theatre watching A Streetcar Named Desire. With them was a man called Kenneth Michener. Michener was a story editor at MGM, and he told Joshua Logan about a book called Tales of the South Pacific by an unknown author called James A. Michener, and suggested it might help with their work on Mr. Roberts. Within 24 hours, both Logan and Hayward had gone from being mildly intrigued by this book of short stories, which apparently might help give colour to their new show, to being head over heels in love with it and planning to buy the rights before anyone else could beat them to it. They both thought this book would be a perfect vehicle for Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II to turn into a musical. Since their groundbreaking show Oklahoma had opened on Broadway in 1943, success had followed success, and Rodgers and Hammerstein had rather cannily set themselves up as producers and publishers, not just of their own work, but for playwrights and other composers too. Hayward cautioned Logan not to talk to anyone about their new property before it was official, but they knew who they wanted to write their new book musical, and it just had to be Rodgers and Hammerstein. And things probably moved on quicker than Leland Hayward would have liked, when very soon after Joshua Logan seemingly found it impossible to contain his excitement on seeing Richard Rodgers at a drinks party and just blurted out their idea. But it wasn't long before an agreement was drawn up for Messrs. Hayward, Logan, Rodgers and Hammerstein to co-produce this new show, with the canny Rodgers and Hammerstein negotiating an all-important 51% of the property. After years of hard slog, Rodgers and Hammerstein had developed a keen eye for business, and Leland Hayward had been only too well aware of that. But at least they had a deal. And with their agreement all settled, now all they had to do was locate James A. Michener and negotiate terms. And as luck would have it, he just happened to live about 10 minutes down the road from the Hammerstein's farm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. James A. Michener had sailed as an able-bodied seaman in the British Merchant Navy and was assigned by the Navy in World War II to a roving job that took him back and forth among several islands in the South Pacific. Tales of the South Pacific has a compelling narrative from the very start, confiding with the reader and seamlessly beckoning them to join in the story. I wish I could tell you about the South Pacific, the way it actually was, the endless ocean, the infinite specks of coral we called islands, coconut palms nodding gracefully toward the ocean, reefs upon which waves broke into spray, and inner lagoons lovely beyond description. I wish I could tell you about the sweating jungle, the full moon rising behind the volcanoes, and the waiting, the timeless, repetitive waiting. But whenever I start to talk about the South Pacific, people intervene. I try to tell somebody what the steaming Hebrides were like. The first thing you know, I'm telling about the old Tonkinese woman who used to sell human heads as souvenirs for $50. And this series of stories of wartime adventure laced with humour and romance observed the different cultures mingling together during a time of crisis. And it not only won Michener the distinguished 1948 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, but a contract to have his book made into a musical by one of the most successful show-writing teams in the business, Rodgers and Hammerstein. Right, that's it for this episode. Coming up, we'll be looking at how the process of writing the show slowly found its feet, and why they ended up choosing an opera singer for one of the leads to play opposite one of the most charming and modest musical theatre performers ever, who became so excited when she heard one of her songs for the first time, she fell off the piano stool she was perched on to listen to it. I'm Lesley Anne Knight. You can find Just Talking Musicals on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and as a handy podcast as well. Oh yes, and as ever, we'd love it if you press subscribe. There's nothing to pay, but it means you get sent a message when we post a new episode. Coming up, don't miss part 2 of our South Pacific story on Just Talking Musicals.
Just talking musicals with you.